All right, I think I am starting to see participant numbers here, so I'm assuming folks are in, and welcome to this webinar. We'll jump into the full discussion in a minute, but I think we're going to begin with a video. Well, thank you all so much for joining. I think that video set the stage quite powerfully for much of what I will say shortly as we begin this. But I do just want to start by welcoming all of you to the first in our series of webinars for this Climate Links community on the new USAID Climate Strategy. We have an exciting panel here today that reflects the strategy's truly whole of agency nature. I'm joined today by Allison Brown of USAID's Bureau for Conflict Prevention and Stabilization, who will present the strategy, as well as Sharon Gulick from our mission in Mexico, who will give us some perspective on how the mission is already thinking about implementing the new strategy. And then we want to make sure that there's a good bulk of time for hearing your questions. So we do have some time for Q&A at the end, and Becky Chaco from the strategy implementation team will also join us to help answer your questions. So just in terms of process, if you can use the Q&A feature that should, I think, be at the bottom right of the Zoom screen to enter any questions that you do have, then we can make sure to have them all in one place and answer them as we get towards the end of the presentation portion. Next slide, please. So we, just to kind of set the stage, some of this is what we just saw in the video, but we unfortunately know all too well at this point the impacts of climate change on all of us, but particularly the most vulnerable. As temperatures and sea levels rise, people's lives are increasingly being upended or cut short by droughts, storms, fires, and floods that will only become more destructive unless we act with the urgency and ambition that this crisis demands. Climate change is threatening, as the video made clear, development progress and exacerbating global inequities, increasing water and food scarcity, the need for humanitarian assistance, and displacement and contributing to conflict. But we also know that at the same time, our response presents an opportunity to improve livelihoods. Decarbonizing industry means less air pollution that negatively impacts health. Building climate resilient infrastructure means people are safer when disasters do strike and reduces the need for costly repairs after every storm. And investing in green jobs presents an opportunity to make workforces more inclusive. Next slide, please. So, this point is probably the most key one for this conversation, that there is literally everyone has a role to play in this. It crosses every kind of program that we do. And we are all, I think, as a government, we have seen very clearly that climate change is a priority, and it has to be sort of infused through every agency and every kind of major priority that we have. For USAID's part, climate needs to be a priority because it does touch everything that we do. And we know that Administrator Power has often said and continues to say that we are a climate agency now. As you'll hear in a minute, the climate strategy was developed with a true all hands on deck approach. And only really by taking that all hands on deck approach to the implementation of it can we meet the sort of most immediate needs of the climate crisis today and support larger scale transformations in key global systems like agriculture, energy, governance, infrastructure, and health, all of which obviously are essential in the long run. And just to note before I have a chance to turn it over so you can hear about what the true content of the strategy, this support does go both ways. Our Power Africa team is boosting global health efforts by targeting resources to bring stable, renewable energy to hospitals and off-grid care facilities, keeping the lights on so that these centers can tackle COVID across the continent. I know many of you have been doing great work for decades, and I'm excited to keep working with all of you, as we all are, with this new strategy to take on this supremely important challenge. It truly cannot be business as usual. USAID and the development community can make a bigger difference, and we have to make a bigger difference. And I truly, truly believe that by working all together to make this strategy really happen, we can do that. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Allison to tell us a little bit more about the strategy.
Thanks, Genevieve. I'm trying to get my video on. And for those who don't know, Genevieve joined our team as the USAID Senior Climate and Environment Advisor, and has been really crucial as we get into this implementation stage of making sure that we get to meet all of the ambitious targets and have the focus on our SOs, our strategic objectives, and intermediate results that we need to have based on the strategy. My name is Allison Brown, and I am the Bureau Environmental Officer and Climate Integration Lead for the Conflict Prevention and Stabilization Bureau. And today I'm speaking just as one representative of a very large and inclusive group who brought together sectors, priorities, experiences from across the agency, both in the field and in Washington, to develop this new climate strategy. This new climate strategy that we'll get into in just a few minutes. It really builds on our previous 2012 to 2018 climate change and development strategy. That one really focused on specific and direct climate change mitigation and adaptation measures through renewable energy, natural climate solutions, adaptation, integration, and climate risk management. We've been doing all of this for decades, but now with this new strategy, we're really scaling up and expanding our impact. As you'll see in the next few slides, we're doubling down on the targeted action, but we're simultaneously looking to address key systems that threaten to undermine our work, as well as making sure that USAID does its own part to combat the climate crisis and certainly not add to it. Next slide, please. About a year ago, USAID committed to launch the new strategy at the Leaders Summit in 2021 of April. 1 year later, almost exactly, that commitment was met, and we now have a climate strategy that will guide USAID's work on climate through 2030. I'm assuming that many of the people on this call today have read the climate strategy and have been part of more than the 40 listening sessions with internal and external stakeholders from around the globe. I'm expecting some of you have been part of the NGO teams, the implementing partners teams, the USAID staff in both the field and in Washington, the donor community, women, youth, indigenous peoples, and private sector, who have contributed over 3,800 comments from both internal and external comment periods. We did hold an external comment period for public comments, November 3rd through 24th, coinciding with the start of COP last year, during which time we received more than the 2,800 comments, and we attempted very strongly and very fervently to address and include all of those comments. Next slide, please. So where we're going. In this climate strategy, we plan to leverage our convening power, our global presence, the long-standing partnerships, and the breadth of technical expertise that we already have to make a real difference in the global fight against climate change. We'll partner with local communities, looking to local solutions and amplifying historically unheard voices. We will look at both direct impacts and those systems, such as governance, such as economic systems, such as healthcare systems, and more, to food systems, to be the agents of change that we need to be in order to make the impact we need. We'll also work with communities that are disproportionately vulnerable to climate change. That includes places that have been hardest hit by climate change and those who face other vulnerabilities, such as conflict, reoccurring humanitarian and disasters, and more. The strategy elevates equity and locally led solutions as core principles. Those will be embedded throughout everything we do, and we will center our actions in the context of diverse communities in which we work, engage local, marginalized, and underrepresented groups, not only as those who are more vulnerable to climate change, but really as agents of change, people who can really bring out new solutions and new perspectives that can provide us with more opportunities for impact. Climate change affects everything USAID does, every place USAID works, and every sector has a role to play in our response. This will greatly increase USAID's impact in tackling climate change, and it will also go a long way towards making our programs more resilient to the climate impacts that are already impacting them. Next slide, please. We'll talk about the targets that we have. I'm not going to read all of these because they're right here, and you're welcome to ask about any. But the point of this slide is there is a target for every single operating unit, sector, NGO. Anyone can contribute to at least one of these targets. For example, with our mitigation target, we're going to partner with countries to support activities that reduce, avoid, or sequester 6 billion metric tons of carbon dioxide equivalent, or in other words, the equivalent of all US GHG emissions in 2020. Now, obviously, we can't do that alone, and that will take other, that will include the natural climate solutions and the managed ecosystems that we expect to support and protect. It will include the climate finance that we are expecting to help mobilize both private and public. And it will require that we work with our country, or the country support mechanisms that we have, and really talk through and enhance the voices and amplify the voices of the critical populations in countries that we are working with as well. These 2030 targets will be updated and supplemented with interim targets throughout the strategy's lifetime, and our budget as experience with delivery evolves. That will include targets, interim targets that are based on this administration's lifetime. The targets were developed in collaboration with monitoring, evaluation, and learning staff from around the agency and represent what we want to achieve. These are ambitious targets, and although we do not expect to fail, we definitely wanted to be more ambitious than safe with these targets, and are really looking to all of our partners to help us reach these goals. Next slide, please. As you'll see on this slide, we put a lot of effort, as Genevieve was talking about, all of the various people, all of the different sectors that were involved in making this a whole of agency strategy. You can see that this came down into 3 main parts. We have direct targeted action that includes mitigation, adaptation, climate finance, and really making sure that the people who have the answers such as our indigenous people colleagues and support system, as well as women, youth, and other marginalized populations such as disabled peoples are those voices are amplified and really leaned on. You can see that we then are also looking at systems change through this combination of looking, and this is where we can't separate adaptation and mitigation, right? We need to look at systemically what is going on that will undermine our targeted work if we don't get those under control. And then we have to do our part. USAID can't be emitting carbon dioxide into the world while we're telling others to lower theirs. And so we're really working on both the mitigation aspect of our own work, the work of our partners, and as well as looking into and amplifying the equitable nature of where we go from here. As you can see, the strategy aims to enable both confront the most urgent demands of the climate crisis and transform systems in a way that helps lock in our trajectory for lasting and feasible net zero and climate resilient pathways. In all of this, we are committing to empowering accessible and inclusive approaches through which local communities and the marginalized and underrepresented groups within them are meaningfully engaged as climate agents. And we're thinking about how USAID can ensure we are reflecting these values internally. This means reforming our own operations to combat and be resilient to the crisis, and to ensure our workforce is stronger through an enhanced focus on diversity, equity, and inclusion, and accessibility. Next slide, please. USAID will coordinate internally to organize and galvanize the whole of agency response to the climate crisis. The team coordinating USAID's climate strategy implementation includes personnel from across all of USAID's bureaus and independent offices. Of course, we cannot achieve the huge scale of our targets without an all hands on deck approach, and that includes all of our partners. We will continue working across the US government departments and agencies with Congress and our partners and our partner governments, implementing partners, and with local organizations to identify how we can best target our work to achieve optimal climate and development objectives, both now and in the future. USAID will develop and regularly update robust guidance for tracking our progress as we implement this strategy. The strategy also includes requirements and recommendations for all USAID operating units to facilitate implementation. To reduce inefficiencies and improve coherence across all programming, much of our implementation guidance integrates into existing processes, such as budget planning, workforce recruitment, and monitoring, evaluation, and learning, which are routine features of the USAID program cycle. We are dedicating resources to capacity building, knowledge management, and communications to support our whole of agency approach to climate change. As we ramp up our climate change programming and incorporate climate action throughout USAID sectors and operations, we anticipate there will be new opportunities to partner with USAID to tackle the climate crisis. You can find out more about how to partner with us by visiting workwithusaid.org. With that, I turn it over to my colleague from USAID Mexico to give some perspectives on what this means for our work on the ground.
Thank you so much, Allison. Hi, everyone. My name is Sharon Gulick. I'm the Director of the Office of Sustainable Development at USAID Mexico, covering the missions climate portfolio. Next slide. So in this presentation, first, I'll be giving you some context on Mexico regarding climate and what the mission is doing. And then I'll talk a little bit about the shift in our approach to strengthen our contributions to the new strategy. Next slide. So the mission here supports the government of Mexico's development and climate priorities through a series of programs and partnerships promoting energy efficiency and natural climate solutions. On the natural climate solution side, the mission has been doing this kind of work for many years and supports Mexico's goal of net zero deforestation by 2030 through initiatives that enhance transparency and use market-based solutions to reduce deforestation and land degradation. This support includes partnering with the very robust private sector in Mexico and communities, as well as unlocking finance to promote sustainable value chains. We also work with the government of Mexico to improve forest management systems to reduce illegal logging. So on the energy side, This work is a lot newer for the mission and more challenging politically, but there is still a significant potential for emissions reductions. The mission focuses on energy efficiency measures, which are often among the most cost-effective ways to reduce greenhouse gas emissions in Mexico. So over the last few, just to give a picture of the trends within the mission, over the last few years, the mission has had a smaller annual budget and smaller programs, mostly focused on natural climate solutions in southern Mexico. So fortuitously for the mission, budgets started increasing for us a bit before the administration change in the US. So we started thinking about where and how to build new programs, understanding the political constraints and taking advantage of opportunities as they arise. Next slide. So where is Mexico relative to other large emitters globally? Mexico, as you can see on the slide, Mexico is the 12th largest emitter and the 18th largest per capita. What you see there, the chart shows the breakdown by sector, and you'll notice that it's a little old, but the breakdown is still is pretty similar to what you'll see there. So significant opportunities for mitigation exist in Mexico to help Mexico achieve its nationally determined contribution. So although climate has not been a priority of this government of Mexico administration, evidenced by backsliding on energy reforms, making work on renewable energy generation challenging, budget reductions in environmentally focused ministries, there's still significant interest from the private sector and other non-government actors in greening the economy, and strong support among states and cities. There's a lot of opportunity in the space for us to work on natural climate solutions and to expand our work on natural climate solutions and energy efficiency, which is where our focus has lied. So the other thing is that because of the dynamic political situation here, and I mean, I know that this will sound familiar to a lot of people on the call, we are remaining flexible to try to take advantage of policy opportunities that arise. Next slide. So this slide shows the potential for natural climate solutions to contribute to mitigation in Mexico by 2030 without having negative impacts on food security or biodiversity. So based on an analysis presented in a study from 2017, only a handful of countries have greater potential than Mexico related to natural climate solutions. You may ask, given that there's a green sliding scale at the bottom, why Mexico is gray? And the reason why it's gray is because that we selected Mexico to bring up the data, but it's in fact green if you look at it in that link. Okay, next slide. So briefly, some other facts and figures. Millions of Mexicans depend on natural resources, agriculture, and forests for their livelihoods. The highest levels of deforestation in Mexico are in the south. That's actually what that unlabeled graph shows, or the unlabeled map is showing deforestation rates in Mexico. And those rates of deforestation are actually coincident with the highest poverty rates in Mexico also. Indigenous communities are concentrated in the south also, and predominantly rural employment in the south is in the agriculture sector. Most forests in southern Mexico are communally owned and managed, up to 70%. So that working with producers and the companies that source from these areas have an outsized impact when it comes to reduction in emissions. So despite the fact that we've worked in natural climate solutions for a lot of years, we still had questions on how to scale up to achieve larger results. Next slide. So to ensure our portfolio achieves these, or tries to help achieve these ambitious agency climate and development outcomes, and also address the priorities of the government of Mexico, we used a combination of formal analyses, consultations, and co-creation to get a sound understanding of the dynamics within forest and agricultural landscapes in southern Mexico. And we centered our recently awarded programs around them. So some of the things we've learned include, and this is not going to sound super exciting, but it's really important, the power of fostering collaboration within and across landscapes between organizations, donors, and programs that already exist, only creating new things when they don't already exist. So this is something that we're also trying to integrate as we can in ongoing programs. A key obstacle that we found to achieving natural climate solutions outcomes at scale in Mexico while supporting smallholder farmers has been access to finance for them to transform their agricultural and business practices to better access higher value markets. So our programs also we've started focusing on programs on building financial tools and helping smallholders to access those tools. So politics, something that all of us have to work within and amongst. We all are in it. We frame our climate work here to align with political priorities, even if that means downplaying the language of climate. So this has been beneficial actually both under Mexican and US administrations. So we end up focusing particularly on natural climate solutions work on the strengthening of markets, private sector investment, income generation, job creation, all which strive to reduce emissions. We've built 2 large programs centered around these elements. One was awarded last September and one will be awarded this fiscal year. Next. On the energy side, so this Mexican administration has favored state-owned fossil fuel enterprises over renewable energy. So working on renewable energy generation isn't currently politically viable. But not addressing energy, the largest emitting sector in Mexico, puts achieving the nationally determined contribution seriously at risk. So then, of course, the question is, where are the opportunities? So luckily, we've been able to take advantage of high-level US interest and engagement to identify workable areas of cooperation with Mexico. And that bucket area has been on energy efficiency, but more specifically, energy efficiency, clean transport, and elements of short-lived climate pollutants work. And in addition, and very importantly, there are significant state and city level champions of both clean energy and energy efficiency, and also a robust private sector. Next slide. So while USAID programs haven't typically fully focused on these elements, energy efficiency can provide significant mitigation potential, while at the same time providing benefits to families and businesses in the form of reduced energy bills. Energy efficiency investments create jobs directly in the production of efficient technologies, as well as in infrastructure projects. So we have the mission has a new program that will be finalized this fiscal year that will focus on these elements that are the pre-identified areas of collaboration. The other thing we've done because of the political dynamism here is built in some flexibility into our new award to enable the expansion into other now politically challenging areas, but other sectors should it materialize that we can. Next slide. And so ultimately, how is it that the missions could contributing to the new strategy? You'll see, I only put a couple numbers here so far, which don't tell the whole story. What these numbers don't really reflect is the magnitude of change in what we're contributing. So with the shift in our approach and our new programs, our climate finance targets are an order of magnitude larger than before. We're still finalizing these given that the new programs aren't really online yet. We'll refine the mitigation targets also once the new programs are finalized, and expect those to increase quite a bit. So there's also a number of targets that the mission hasn't focused on contributing to so far that are in the climate strategy, and we're working with our implementers, and we're thinking about ways that we will be able to track that under the new climate strategy. And that definitely includes hectares under improved management, and it also includes elements of under the second strategic objective. Next slide. Thank you. Thank you so much for your attention today.
Great. Thank you so much for that really, truly fascinating and helpful presentation. I think we all are very aware that our missions have been champions in the field on this kind of work for some time. And it is really important for us to recognize that many of them have truly been tackling the climate crisis for decades. And, the design of this strategy, which I hope has been, clear in the conversation so far, is really to give missions the tools and support that they need to ramp up impact. So now we really want to make sure we do have time for your questions. If you have not already done so, please do put anything that is burning in your mind in the Q&A portion of the chat. We will do our best to sort of get to all of them in the time that we have, and where we if we run into challenges there, we will surely sort of follow up with any of the pieces of it. So what I'm going to do is start with the question that is at the top, at least in my window, which is, how do you plan to sustain mitigation interventions, especially for those in landscape restoration like forestry, given the changing dynamics, socioeconomic dynamics? Are there incentives plan to sustain such interventions. So I think what I will do is actually, I would love to hear if you have thoughts on that, Sharon, and then open it up to any of the other panelists who are interested in speaking to that.
Hi, thanks. I'll try first. Sure. Okay. So one of the things that we are blessed with here in Mexico is a really strong private sector that really does want a stronger, greener economy. And so part of what our plan is, because of political fluctuations and reduction in budgets from the government of Mexico to like key environmental institutions in Mexico, is to expend a lot of effort engaging with the private sector to try to strengthen all the funding streams and those networks so that they can extend beyond the life of our programming. The other thing that we're doing is actually in our work with the government of Mexico, because we encountered, I'm sure this is going to sound familiar to a lot of you, that a lot of churn in high-level government officials. And so instead of working on the capacity building of them, related to landscape restoration and mitigation and just like systemic government of Mexico things, instead we're working on the systems themselves within the government of Mexico. So things that will ideally extend beyond either the churn in the politicians or in our programs. Thanks.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Does anybody else want to come in on that before we turn to the next question?
Genevieve, I'll come in, and I think will be a dual answer a bit, because there's also a question about how do we integrate climate into a lot of these non-climate sectors, such as governance, such as conflict, such as health, et cetera. And I think that that's where a lot of our sustainability in the climate strategy is going to come, because once we get it in everywhere, it's going to be just part of the system, and people aren't going to then pull it out intentionally. We're not going to say, oh, we don't want to consider the climate context when we go into a conflict situation, or we don't want to consider what are the indigenous populations doing in this area when we're talking about land use and management. And so I think that this is really one of those places where integration is key to a lot of what we're trying to achieve, getting people on board, bringing them along with how climate really interacts with what they're already doing. A lot, in the conflict bureau, one of the things that I've been telling my bureau is we are not pivoting all of our work to be climate work. What we're doing is bringing climate to be integrated into what we're already doing, to strengthen bidirectionally, both directions benefiting from bringing climate into the work. And so that's what I would say for both the sustainability and this opportunity for integration. And just for that particular question, we are developing resources sector by sector to say, how do you bring climate change into the programming, into the conversation, into the strategizing? And we're doing that by sectors so that we can have some good resources. One of the things, as I read a lot of these questions, I think that the answer is, it really depends. Context is everything, and there is not going to be a one-size-fits-all answer to any of these questions. And that's really one of the reasons that we really were focused on and adamant about having an entire all hands on deck, entire agency strategy. Over.
Great, that's so helpful. Thank you for that. And I do think, especially, just thank you for all of the fantastic questions that are coming in. We probably, in our time, we're going to, again, sort of keep driving to get through as many as we can, but I think we will follow up with you on specifics, but I think it was really helpful, Allison, to sort of speak kind of across them to something that is just sort of so fundamental to each of the different issues we see popping up in this chat. So I think, one question that I have seen pop up a few times in a few different ways is kind of what is the role for international partners in implementing this and being part of this journey. And I guess I'm just going to start quickly with a thought, but then, very much open it up to others. I think, and honestly, I think in the chat and in conversations to follow, it will actually be great to hear your answers to that question. I think one thing that is clear to me, and I, not having introduced myself at the outset, I will just say I was at AID previously and worked actually on the first climate strategy, and then was away for a while and just returned. And it has been unbelievably exciting to see this sort of second strategy develop and move out the door in a way that is so consistent with a broader global momentum and conversation around climate, but also very sort of focused on what USAID's specific role is within that sort of broader momentum. And so I think that the sort of international partners, implementing partners, are so fundamental to kind of driving forward a lot of the sort of key priorities that are within this. And I think that, in some ways, what I'm seeing is that there is a more consistent set of core priorities that has emerged in a broader global discourse than it has existed for years and years. And so in some ways, if we are able to sort of have that sort of very clear common agenda, then we can sort of do a better job at, and then we can get to one of the other questions in a second, sort of identifying where the greatest gaps are. And so one of the other questions was about, gaps in adaptation finance as we drive forward towards the COP in Egypt that's supposed to be focused on implementation and adaptation and some of these sort of core other issues. So we can get to that question again in a second, but I do want to just open it up because this is such a big question that relates to so much of what each of the other panelists and folks on this call do. So I don't know, Sharon, Becky, or Allison, if you had any additional thoughts on sort of the role for so many of the partners who are on this call. We can also, because of time, sort of move on to another question. So I do want to quickly hit this question about the climate finance strategy and how we can address the historic imbalance between mitigation and adaptation finance. I think just a quick response to that is that we are not where we need to be in terms of that balance, and the budget process is a vehicle for fighting hard to get more funding for direct adaptation work. And we're going to keep fighting as hard as we can within that process to try and sort of drive more public funds towards that. But it is clear that we're nowhere close to where we need to be in terms of mobilizing private finance as a global community towards adaptation. And so I think one of the key tenets and a lot of the sort of vehicles that we are driving forward within the climate strategy and within the climate finance strategy specifically is about finding ways to leverage additional private sector finance for adaptation work. So it is, you label just a core gap in the broader conversation and a core priority for us. So I think there are a number of very exciting platforms, which we can sort of continue to talk about, vehicles, which we can talk about sort of offline, but it's just central to our priorities to sort of make that happen right now. So one thing I would love to, because I know with all that's coming in and with the time constraints that we have, one question I saw that I would actually love to just put to the group is, what projects are you most excited about? Maybe I can turn that to Sharon first, and then within the implementation space, Becky, can you speak to that next?
Yeah, so it's like perhaps unsurprisingly, the project I'm most excited about is one that we're working on here in Mexico. Actually, I'm excited about I think that the kinds of things that we're doing here are really exciting. It's happened that I've worked a lot more on the energy side of things in recent times, and I know that the program that we're putting together that is focused up nationally on energy efficiency, clean transport, and short-lived climate pollutants, it's just an exciting topic area for me, and it's something that I think is really quite unusual at USAID, and so excited about just seeing what ends up happening with that program as it rolls out.
So I'll just say there's so much to be excited about. I couldn't pick even a few to mention, but I'll also just say, I think what I'm most excited about is what is to come. As Allison was saying, we've put this challenge forward to the agency. We have some processes in place now to help various sectors to think about how do we make climate change a part of so much of our other programming, I think this challenge that we've put forward in the strategy of thinking about systems and systems change is really exciting. And I think that challenge is on us now to figure out what that looks like in designs and programs. And I'm really excited to see what comes next.
If I can piggyback on that, I think I'm totally with Becky that what I'm most excited about is the creativity and the unknown of implementing the climate strategy at this point. You know, we're diving into areas that the agency may not have been strong on before, or may not have been able to do before. And we're really able to, with this strategy permission from the administration, we're really able to go into places such as, you know, using migration as an adaptation form, or really promoting the private sector partnership to help with climate finance. And so making sure that everything has that equity lens, making sure everything has that understanding of we cannot do this alone and we cannot do this for anyone. It's all a partnership and it's all coming together. I think that we're in some really exciting places as we listen to the voices of women and disabled people and children and people that we have not historically really leaned on. And so that's really what I'm the very, very most excited about.
That's great. Thank you all so much for that. I think one question that would be great to put to you first, Becky, is there was a question about how countries, what should be done where where mission has just finished a CDCS, and then kind of how do we incorporate the climate strategy? I also think, just as a tack onto that, because I also saw another question about sort of the how of incorporating climate into food, clean energy, water programs in other areas. So sort of the how of integration to the earlier points that folks, you know, that Allison and folks made quite well. And then what do we do about CDCSs that are just completed?
So the country development cooperation strategy, or CDCS, or RDCS in the case of a region, is luckily a living process. So while many of the CDCSs were recently completed, one of the things that we highlighted in this strategy, if you look at the roadmap to implementation, was a need to come back around and think about this climate strategy and how it relates to that CDCS, and how we can continue to bring that into the overall mission approach and into the programming, given that those are 5-year documents. And so there's a process in place to do that. We're encouraging missions to do that as part of the normal processes that already take place around CDCSs. So a mission goes through a process of all missions go through a process of doing portfolio reviews, where they look across the mission at what's being done, and they take stock and they look at what is coming next. So that could be a great process for missions to look at that. Also, there are mid-course stock takings for the CDCS. Regardless, we're asking all missions over the course of the next year to take a look at the climate strategy, to identify how they can contribute to the objectives and the targets in the strategy, and to put a short addition in the existing climate annex of the CDCS to capture that dialogue. So we do think that's an important process, and we wanted to make sure climate change was considered there. I have a hard time answering the how on integration, Genevieve, without kind of being very generic, because I think it depends on each sector, but we have people at USAID who are thinking really hard about that in each sector, and identifying the places where there's an opportunity to contribute to climate change results while still contributing to the results that are looked for in each sector. And I think that's really a critical piece, and just recognizing that we cannot achieve our development and humanitarian objectives unless we tackle this crisis. And so each sector is looking at where are the best opportunities for them to engage, how can we contribute to these targets, and there'll be specific processes in each sector. And and there'll be guidance coming out from those sectors as they think about what those best opportunities are.
That's great. Thank you so much for that, for both of those points. So unfortunately, we are out of time now. If you do still have outstanding questions, please email us at climatestrategy@usaid.gov, or you are more than welcome to join one of our 2 next webinars on the strategy. So one of them is on May 9th at 9 p.m. Eastern time, and the next one is on May 17th at 8 a.m. Eastern time. The strategy presentation will be similar, but we'll have a different mission presentation and get to some more questions at that point. And I also want to plug that Climate Links is starting a monthly climate topics webinar series that will be fairly collaborative. So in the registration links for this same webinar, you can propose topics or let us know by email. Thank you again so much to our panel, and thank you to all of you for coming and putting great questions in the chat and really getting this conversation going. Let's go forward and meet the moment. Thank you so much.